Hi, my name is Mike, and I never imagined I'd be sharing a story like this. Life was supposed to be simple, good, and predictable, or so I thought. I had a great job, a beautiful wife named Emily, and a future I couldn't wait to live. Everything seemed perfect. But life has a way of surprising you, doesn't it? It all started about a month ago. You ever get that feeling in your gut, the one that whispers something isn't right? That's where I was. It wasn't one big moment, no dramatic revelation. It was a series of little things, small, almost imperceptible changes that piled up until I couldn't ignore them anymore. Emily, who used to leave her phone on the counter without a second thought, suddenly had it glued to her hand. She was smiling at her screen more than at me, and the second I walked by, her screen would go dark. At first, I tried to shake it off. "You're imagining things," I told myself. But then there was the way her mood shifted when I mentioned an upcoming business trip. Her eyes lit up, not with sadness or concern, but excitement. The kind of excitement you see when someone gets news they've been waiting for. That night, she was unusually sweet to me. Too sweet, almost like she was compensating for something. I couldn't shake the unease building in my chest. Was I overthinking things? Was this just paranoia? Or was something much bigger at play? The question swirled in my mind, keeping me up at night. I wanted to believe Emily wouldn't hurt me. I wanted to believe in the life we'd built. But that nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. And so, I decided, if something was going on, I needed to know. The uneasy feeling gnawed at me every day, and it wasn't long before those little signs started becoming harder to ignore. Emily wasn't just secretive with her phone. She was downright protective. The same woman who used to leave it lying around now kept it either in her hand or buried in her purse, like it held the secrets of the universe. I started noticing her late-night texting sessions. She'd sit on the couch, her fingers flying across the screen, smiling to herself, completely oblivious to the fact that I was watching. At first, I tried to push the doubts out of my mind. Maybe she was just talking to a friend. Maybe she was planning a surprise for me. But the signs kept coming. One evening, while she was in the shower, I glanced at her phone sitting on the bathroom counter. The screen was locked, but the notifications told me all I needed to know. There were multiple messages from someone named Brad, and they weren't the kind of messages you'd send to a coworker or a friend. One of them read, "Can't wait to see you again." My stomach dropped. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mind raced with questions, but I didn't want to confront her, not yet. What if I was wrong? What if there was a perfectly innocent explanation? Accusing her without proof would only make things worse, so I decided to keep watching, quietly gathering information. The final straw came when I mentioned my upcoming 3-day business trip. Normally, Emily would be at least a little disappointed, but this time, she practically glowed with excitement. "Oh, that's great, you'll have a good time," she said, her voice almost too cheerful. That night, as she kissed me goodnight, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I spent hours lying awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do. Confronting her felt premature. I needed something concrete. That's when an idea hit me. Hidden cameras. It felt extreme, even wrong, but I needed to know the truth. The next day, I ordered 2 small, discreet cameras online. They were easy to hide and gave me access to a live feed from my laptop. When the cameras arrived, I waited until Emily left for work before setting them up. One went in the living room, tucked behind a picture frame, and the other in the kitchen, hidden between some cookbooks. They covered the main areas of the house, the places where any unusual activity would likely happen. I told myself this was just temporary, a way to confirm or dismiss my suspicions, but deep down I knew the truth was coming. And I wasn't ready for what I might find. The day of my business trip arrived, and my heart felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. I packed my bags, kissed Emily goodbye, and told her I'd call her later that evening. Her response? A cheerful, "Have a great trip, babe," as she practically shoved me out the door. I couldn't help but notice how light she seemed, as if a weight had been lifted. It made my stomach churn. Instead of heading to the airport, I drove across town to my friend's place. He was out of town for a few days and had offered his house if I ever needed it. I set up my laptop, logged into the camera feeds, and waited. The empty living room filled the screen, silent and still. I didn't know what I was expecting to see, but the anticipation was suffocating. By 6 p.m., Emily came home from work. At first, everything seemed normal. She tossed her bag on the counter, kicked off her shoes, and poured herself a glass of wine. But then things started to shift. She turned on music, something upbeat, and began tidying the house. Not just her usual quick cleanup, though. This was different. She wiped down the counters, fluffed the couch pillows, and even lit a scented candle. My chest tightened as I watched her glide around the house like she was preparing for something. Or someone. Then she went to the kitchen. My breath caught when I saw her pull out ingredients for dinner. Emily wasn't the kind of person who went all out in the kitchen unless it was a special occasion. But tonight? She was making steak, mashed potatoes, and a salad. She even set the table with our best plates and lit another candle. The scene looked like something out of a romantic movie, but I wasn't the leading man in this story. I sat there, my fists clenched, watching her laugh to herself as she cooked. She seemed happy. Too happy. And then, at 7:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. My heart dropped into my stomach as I watched her practically float to the door, her heels clicking against the floor. When she opened it, there he was, Brad. Tall, confident, and smug as hell. He had that kind of look you'd see in a cologne ad, the kind that made you want to punch him on sight. She greeted him with a smile I hadn't seen in years, warm, excited, and far too familiar. They hugged, and it wasn't just a polite, friendly hug. It lingered, her hands resting on his shoulders as she looked up at him like he was the center of her world. As he stepped inside, Brad glanced around and said, "Wow, Emily, you really went all out." His voice was smooth, dripping with arrogance. Emily laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Oh, it's nothing," she said. "I just wanted tonight to be special." Special. That word echoed in my head like a taunt. I wanted to scream, to punch something, but instead I sat frozen, staring at the screen. I had my proof. Everything I needed to confront her was right there in front of me. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. They moved to the dining room where Emily poured Brad a glass of wine. Little did she know I had swapped that bottle out earlier that morning with one spiked with a hefty dose of laxatives. It was a small, petty act of revenge, but at that moment it felt like my only shred of control in this mess. As they clinked glasses and laughed, I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding. The real confrontation would come later. For now, I was going to watch Emily's perfect little evening unravel. The moment Brad stepped into my house, I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. Watching Emily cater to him, laughing and smiling like she hadn't shattered everything we'd built, was like a knife twisting in my gut. But I held it together. I wasn't going to confront her just yet. No, I wanted to see this play out. At first, everything seemed to go perfectly for her. Emily poured Brad a glass of the wine I had carefully prepared, and they toasted like they didn't have a care in the world. She served the dinner she'd worked so hard on, steak cooked to perfection, creamy mashed potatoes, and a fresh salad. They ate, laughed, and shared stories. To an outsider, it probably looked like a perfect date, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. It started subtle. Emily shifted in her chair, her smile faltering for just a moment. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then it happened again. A slight grimace, a hand resting on her stomach. She excused herself politely and walked to the bathroom, trying to keep her composure. Brad didn't seem to notice much, too busy scrolling on his phone and finishing his wine. When Emily returned, she was still trying to keep up appearances. "Sorry about that," she said with a nervous laugh. "I think I ate something funny earlier." Brad shrugged it off, telling her not to worry, but I could see the tension building in her eyes. As they continued to talk, she took another sip of the wine, a move she'd soon regret. It wasn't long before she excused herself again, this time walking faster toward the bathroom. Brad glanced toward the hallway, his face slowly shifting from amused to mildly concerned. I couldn't help but smirk as I watched him drum his fingers on the table, clearly trying to decide whether to wait or leave. When Emily finally returned, she looked visibly worse. Her hair was slightly out of place and her makeup had started to smudge. She forced a weak smile and tried to steer the conversation back to a lighter tone, but her discomfort was written all over her face. "Are you sure you're okay?" Brad asked, leaning forward. Emily waved him off, though her voice wavered. "Yes, I'm fine. It's just a little stomach bug or something. Let's keep talking." But fate, or the laxatives, wasn't done with her yet. Less than 10 minutes later, she abruptly stood up, muttering an apology as she practically ran to the bathroom. This time, the sound of her heels clicking against the floor was almost comical. Brad sat there, confused and clearly annoyed. He glanced around the room, checked his phone again, and sighed heavily. When Emily finally came back, she looked completely defeated. Her once poised demeanor was gone, replaced by a pale, disheveled mess. She tried to salvage the evening, but Brad had clearly had enough. "Emily," he said carefully, standing up and grabbing his jacket, "maybe tonight's not the best time. You're obviously not feeling well." "No, Brad, wait," Emily pleaded, reaching for his arm. "It's just a little stomach thing. I'm fine, really." Brad gave her a tight smile and stepped back. "It's okay. We can reschedule. Get some rest." Without another word, he walked out the door, leaving Emily standing there, frozen. The door clicked shut and she leaned against it, her face a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and despair. The romantic evening she'd planned had completely fallen apart, and she was left alone with her failure. I leaned back in my chair, watching the live feed with a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Emily had planned the perfect night, but karma had other ideas. As much as I enjoyed watching her crumble, I knew the real showdown was still to come. Tomorrow I would confront her with everything I knew, and she wouldn't be able to hide behind her lies anymore. The next morning I woke up early, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Today was the day. Emily didn't expect me back until late in the evening, but I wanted to catch her off guard. I packed up my laptop and drove home, my mind racing as I replayed everything I had seen the night before. I wasn't nervous anymore, just ready to end this charade. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed her car was still there. Perfect. She was home. As I walked inside, the house felt different. The remnants of last night's failed dinner were still there. The plates, the candles, even the bottle of spiked wine sitting half empty on the counter. Emily was at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her phone. When she heard the door open, her head snapped up. "Mike," she stammered, her eyes wide with surprise. What are you doing here?" I dropped my bag onto the counter and folded my arms, my expression cold. "Came home early," I said simply. "Thought I'd surprise you." She quickly stood up, trying to act casual, but I could see the panic in her eyes. "Oh, I didn't expect you. I was just about to clean up from last night." "Don't bother," I said, stepping closer. "I already know what happened." Her face turned pale. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my bag, pulled out my laptop, and set it on the table. With a few clicks, I opened the video feed from the hidden cameras. "This," I said, turning the screen toward her. Emily's hand flew to her mouth as the footage played. The door opening, Brad stepping inside, their lingering hug. It was all there. Her breath hitched, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Mike, Save it," I snapped, slamming the laptop shut. "I've been watching you lie to my face for weeks, watching you act like everything was fine while you planned a romantic evening for another man in my house." Her tears started falling and she shook her head frantically. "It wasn't like that. I swear nothing happened. I didn't mean to." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice cold. "Don't stand there and insult my intelligence. You think this was innocent? The candles, the dinner, the dress you haven't worn in years? Don't lie to me, Emily." She dropped to her knees, sobbing into her hands. "I made a mistake," she choked out. "I wasn't thinking. Please, Mike, don't do this. We can fix this." Her words only fueled my anger. "Fix this," I said, my voice rising. "You don't fix something by breaking it, Emily. You destroyed this marriage the moment you let him into our home." "I love you," she cried, clutching at my hand. "I wasn't going to go through with it, I swear. Please, Mike, I'll do anything." I pulled my hand away, disgusted. "You love me? That's a joke. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied, planned this whole thing, and acted like I didn't exist." She sobbed harder, her shoulders shaking. "Please," she whispered. "I can change. I'll prove it to you." I shook my head, my voice steady and firm. "No, Emily, I'm done. You've had your chances and you threw them away." I reached into my bag again and pulled out a folder, dropping it onto the table. "These are divorce papers," I said. "You've got 3 days to pack your things and get out." Her crying stopped for a moment as she looked at the folder, her face a mixture of shock and devastation. "Mike, no. You can't mean this." "I do," I said coldly. "This is over." I turned and walked upstairs, ignoring her desperate pleas as I grabbed a few things. When I came back down, she was still sitting on the floor, clutching the papers, her tears soaking the pages. I didn't say another word. I walked out the door, leaving her behind with the mess she had created. But I wasn't done yet. There was still Brad to deal with. As I drove away, I couldn't help but smile. If Emily thought she could move on with him, she was in for a rude awakening. I had one more card to play, and I was going to make sure Brad faced the consequences too. After leaving the house, I parked my car a few blocks away and opened my laptop. I couldn't stop thinking about Brad, the smug, confident guy who had waltzed into my home like he owned the place. Emily wasn't the only one who needed to face the consequences. I had done a little research on him during one of my sleepless nights, and what I found was almost too perfect. Brad wasn't just a player, he was married. His wife, Jessica, seemed to have no idea who her husband really was. That was about to change. It didn't take much effort to find Jessica's contact information. Brad wasn't exactly careful about keeping his personal life private. My hands shook slightly as I dialed her number. The phone rang a few times before a polite voice answered, "Hello?" "Hi, Jessica," I began, keeping my tone calm. "My name's Mike, and I know this might seem out of the blue, but I need to talk to you about your husband, Brad." There was a pause on the other end. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted, cautious, almost defensive. "What about Brad?" "I hate to be the one to tell you this," I said, "but he's been seeing my wife, Emily. I have proof. Video proof, to be exact." The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Finally, Jessica's voice broke through, quiet but steady. "You're saying my husband is cheating on me?" "Yes," I replied, my voice firm. "I caught him in my house last night. I can send you the footage if you want to see for yourself." She took a shaky breath. "Send it to me. I need to know the truth." I forwarded her the video clips and waited, my heart pounding as I imagined her watching it. Within minutes, my phone rang again. Jessica's voice was trembling, a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "This isn't the first time he's done something like this." I felt a jolt of anger. "You mean he's cheated before?" "Yes," she admitted bitterly. "Brad has a habit of chasing after women and lying to everyone about it. I thought he'd changed, but I guess I was wrong." We spent the next hour on the phone, sharing stories and piecing together the timeline of Brad and Emily's affair. Jessica was smart, strong, and determined not to let him get away with this. By the end of the call, we had a plan. "I'm going to confront him," Jessica said firmly, "but I want to make sure this doesn't stay hidden. Brad's boss is big on family values, and if he finds out about this, it could ruin Brad's career." "Do what you need to do," I said. "I'll back you up." The fallout began almost immediately. Jessica confronted Brad that night, and according to her, it didn't go well. He tried to deny everything at first, but when she showed him the video, he had no choice but to come clean. "He's furious," she told me the next day, "but he knows he's screwed." Jessica didn't stop there. She sent an anonymous tip to Brad's company, including the video and details of his affair. Within days, word spread through his workplace, and Brad was called into a meeting with HR. Jessica called me afterward, her voice tinged with satisfaction. "He's been suspended pending an investigation. His boss is furious." I couldn't help but smile. Brad's perfect little life was falling apart, and it was exactly what he deserved. Meanwhile, Emily wasn't faring much better. Mutual friends started reaching out to me, asking questions about why we had separated. I didn't give them all the details, but I made sure they knew the truth. Emily tried to spin the story, claiming I was overreacting, but people weren't buying it, especially not after the video started making its way through our circle. Jessica and I stayed in touch throughout the chaos, checking in on each other as we navigated the fallout. One evening, she called me with an update that made me laugh out loud. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Brad proposed to Emily." I nearly dropped my phone. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," she replied, her voice dripping with disbelief. He sent her this long, dramatic message about how they're soulmates and how they should run away together. "What did Emily say?" I asked, smirking. "She told him she needed time to think," Jessica said. "I think she's starting to realize he's not the knight in shining armor she thought he was." We both laughed at the absurdity of it all. Brad and Emily were grasping at straws, their once perfect facades crumbling under the weight of their choices. Watching it all unfold was strangely cathartic. They had played their games, and now they were paying the price. The cracks in Emily's perfect world were spreading fast, and it didn't take long for everything to fall apart. After our confrontation, she tried to put on a brave face, but the weight of her actions was catching up to her. The once confident woman who had orchestrated a romantic evening for another man was now scrambling to keep her life together. It started with our mutual friends. Word of our separation spread quickly, and people began asking questions. Emily, true to form, tried to control the narrative. She told everyone I was being paranoid, that I'd overreacted to nothing. But when a few of those friends reached out to me directly, I didn't hold back. Rachel, one of Emily's closest friends, called me one evening. "Mike," she said hesitantly, "Emily's been saying some things about you, but something doesn't add up. Is there more to this?" "There is," I said bluntly. "I have proof that Emily was seeing another man. She invited him into our house while I was supposed to be away. If she's telling you anything different, she's lying." Rachel was silent for a moment before she sighed. "I had a feeling. She's been acting off." "I'm sorry, Mike." "It's not your fault," I replied. "But I thought you should know the truth." That conversation marked the beginning of Emily's social isolation. Friends who once adored her started pulling away. The more she tried to spin the story, the more obvious it became that she wasn't telling the whole truth. Calls went unanswered, texts left unread. Even her parents reached out to me, their disappointment clear. "Mike," her mother said softly over the phone, "we're so sorry. We didn't know she was capable of this. If there's anything we can do." Hearing that should have felt like a victory, but it didn't. I wasn't interested in their pity. I just wanted to move on. Emily, however, wasn't ready to let go. She left voicemail after voicemail, her voice trembling as she begged me to take her back. "Mike, please, I know I messed up, but I can fix this. Just give me a chance." I deleted every message without listening to the rest. I didn't need to hear her excuses. Her desperation reached its peak one evening when I found her sitting in the living room, staring at the divorce papers I'd left on the table. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up at me as I walked in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mike," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to do anymore. I've lost everything." I stopped and stared at her for a moment, my face unreadable. "Not my problem," I said coldly, walking past her to grab a glass of water. Her shoulders slumped and she let out a shaky breath. I could feel her despair, but I didn't let it affect me. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. For years I had been the one trying to hold us together, but now I was done. A few days later, Rachel called me again. "Mike," she said cautiously, "Emily's been talking about moving out of town. She says she needs a fresh start." I couldn't help but laugh. "Good. The sooner she's gone, the better." Rachel hesitated before adding, "She also mentioned Brad. I think she's debating whether to go to him." That made me laugh even harder. "Let her," I said. "If she thinks he's the answer, she's in for another rude awakening." Emily's downfall was complete. Her friends were gone, her parents had distanced themselves, and the life she'd tried so hard to protect was in ruins. Watching her unravel should have made me feel triumphant, but instead it left me feeling nothing. She wasn't my problem anymore. The day she finally packed her things and left, the house felt different. Lighter. She left a short note on the counter, apologizing one last time and saying she hoped I could forgive her someday. I read it once, then tossed it in the trash. Forgiveness wasn't something I was ready to give. Not yet. Maybe not ever. As I stood in the empty house, I took a deep breath, the silence around me feeling like both a void and a relief. Emily was gone. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally start over. With Emily out of my life and the chaos finally settling, I found myself surrounded by a strange silence. The anger, the betrayal, it was still there, but it was quieter now, like a dull ache instead of a stabbing pain. For the first time in years, I had space to think, space to breathe. It was overwhelming, but also liberating. The first thing I did was reclaim my house. Everything about it still felt like her. Photos, furniture, even the way the light fell in the living room reminded me of a life that no longer existed. One weekend, I decided to clear it all out. The photos came down, the little knickknacks she loved went into a box, and I rearranged the furniture to make the space feel new. By the time I was done, the house didn't feel like ours anymore. It felt like mine. Around this time, Jessica and I started talking more. After the call where I told her about Brad, we kept in touch, first to exchange updates on their respective fallout, and later just to vent. There was something easy about talking to her. She understood what I was going through in a way no one else could. One evening, she called me with an update. "You're not going to believe this," she said, a mix of disbelief and bitterness in her voice. "Brad tried to propose to Emily." I nearly dropped the phone. "You're kidding." "Nope," she replied with a dry laugh. "He sent her this long, dramatic text about how they're meant to be and how this is their chance to start over. And what did Emily say?" "She told him she needed time to think," Jessica said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I think she's starting to realize he's not the knight in shining armor she thought he was." We both laughed, the absurdity of it all easing some of the tension that had been hanging over us. It was the first time in weeks that I felt genuinely lighthearted. Over time, our conversations became more personal. We'd talked about our lives before all this, the dreams we'd had, the sacrifices we'd made, and the things we'd lost. It was strange how much we had in common. One day, Jessica suggested we meet in person. "I think we could both use a break," she said. "What do you say to a hike this weekend?" I agreed, and that Saturday we met at a trailhead not far from her house. The hike was tougher than I expected, but the conversation flowed effortlessly. We joked about our lack of fitness, shared stories about our pasts, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt normal. When we reached the summit, the view was breathtaking. Rolling hills stretched out in every direction, the golden light of the setting sun bathing everything in a warm glow. Jessica turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever feel like all of this, as awful as it's been, was a blessing in disguise?" I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. "Honestly? Yeah. I didn't think I'd ever be able to say that, but it feels like I've finally woken up. I didn't realize how much of myself I'd lost until now." She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Exactly. It still hurts, but maybe it had to happen for us to find something better." Her words stayed with me long after we parted ways. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful, not just about the future, but about the possibility of finding something, someone, worth rebuilding for. Jessica and I didn't rush into anything. We both needed time to heal, and we respected that. But there was an undeniable connection between us, one that grew stronger with every conversation, every moment of shared understanding. We weren't just two people picking up the pieces of our lives. We were helping each other rebuild. And for now, that was enough. The weeks turned into months, and life slowly began to take on a new rhythm. The divorce was finalized without much drama, thanks to the overwhelming evidence I had against Emily. She moved out of town shortly after, leaving behind a short, apologetic note on the counter. I glanced at it, read a few lines, and tossed it into the trash. I didn't need her apologies anymore. I had already made peace with what had happened, or at least I was on my way to it. With Emily gone, the house felt lighter, quieter. At first, the silence was unsettling, but I learned to embrace it. I filled the space with new hobbies, gardening, cooking, even trying my hand at woodworking. Each small project became a step toward reclaiming my life, one piece at a time. Jessica finalized her divorce around the same time, and we celebrated with a simple dinner at her place. It wasn't fancy, just takeout and a bottle of wine, but it felt meaningful. We sat on her back porch, watching the stars, and talked about the future. "It's strange," she said, her voice soft. "For so long I thought I'd never survive this, but now I feel free." I nodded, raising my glass. "To freedom," I said with a smile, "and to finally moving on." Jessica smiled back, clinking her glass against mine. "To new beginnings." Our connection had grown stronger over the months, but neither of us was in a rush to define it. We both knew what it meant to jump into something too quickly, and we didn't want to repeat old mistakes. Instead, we took things one day at a time, finding comfort in each other's presence without any pressure or expectations. One weekend, we decided to take a road trip. Nothing extravagant, just a couple of days in a cabin by a lake a few hours away. The drive was filled with laughter and easy conversation, the kind that made the miles fly by. By the time we arrived, it felt like we'd left all the weight of the past behind us. That evening, as we sat by the lake, the water reflecting the soft glow of the moon, Jessica turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" "All the time," I admitted. "But for the first time, I'm not afraid of it. Whatever happens, I know I'll be okay." She smiled, her eyes shining in the dim light. "Me too." As the night went on, we didn't need to say much. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, of possibility. We had both been through hell, but we'd come out the other side stronger. And while the future was still uncertain, it didn't feel scary anymore. It felt hopeful. I knew I wasn't the same person I'd been before all of this, and neither was Jessica. But maybe that was the point. We weren't trying to go back to who we used to be. We were moving forward, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were heading in the right direction. Life didn't magically become perfect after everything that happened, but it was finally mine to shape. The pain, the betrayal, it all left scars, but they no longer defined me. They became part of my story, lessons I had learned the hard way. Emily stayed out of my life, and I stayed out of hers. I heard bits and pieces from mutual acquaintances. She was trying to rebuild, but the choices she made had left a permanent mark on her relationships. Brad, unsurprisingly, had moved on as well, likely repeating his patterns with someone new. Their chapter in my life was closed, and I had no desire to revisit it. Jessica and I continued to take things slow, savoring the simplicity of our friendship and the connection we had built. We didn't rush into labels or expectations, letting things evolve naturally. It wasn't about replacing what we had lost. It was about creating something new, something healthier. One evening, as we walked through a park near my house, Jessica paused under a canopy of golden autumn leaves. She turned to me, her smile soft but full of meaning. "Do you think we're finally where we're supposed to be?" I looked at her, the woman who had been through just as much as I had, and nodded. "Yeah," I said. "I think we are." It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a life I had rebuilt from the ground up. I was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live on my terms. The storm that had once felt like the end of everything had cleared, leaving behind a sky full of possibilities. As I looked toward the future, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace.